Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar. 30 minutes of concise and very specific information that you will be able to use. We know that testing creates a lot of anxiety for students right now. Policies are changing every week, if not every day. There was just a notice that came out today with new policies for testing for the University of Pennsylvania, for example. So that's why we do this topic and cover this topic quite frequently, because there are continual changes in the testing environment. Good evening, I'm Jan Kirchner. I'm your host for this evening, and I'm happy to welcome you to another one of our webinars, which we've been doing for 18 to 24 months now, ever since COVID, so that we get some very specific and concise information to you that you can use for the issues that you're dealing with right now. So first of all, I'd like to let you know we've got our testing expert here. Elizabeth Hecker is here with us, and I'll be turning that over to her in a moment. We also have Analia Panetta, who will be joining us towards the end when it comes time for questions and answers. So as you think of your questions, please type them into the Q&A box below, and then we will try to get to all of your questions this evening. We also will record this so that by Monday it will be posted on our website, and you will have access to it, and you can also refer your friends to it as well. So let me turn this over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth has been with the College Blueprint since 2012 as a tutor, as our institutional services coordinator, and is also moving into the college counseling ranks of our amazing counseling team. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. You all are in great hands.
Thank you, Jen. So I just wanted to get started tonight with going over some of these testing terms that you may have seen thrown around, especially the last couple of years because of COVID. So we see a lot of schools are test optional, test blind, test flexible. What does that really mean? So test optional is when applicants are allowed to choose whether or not they're going to submit standardized test scores, ACT or SAT test scores, as part of their application. So with schools that go test optional, they will consider a test score if it is submitted. Test blind, on the other hand, these schools are not interested in your scores, and they're not going to consider them even if you submit them. Test required is kind of your standard, pre-COVID setup. The test is still required for application submission. They want to see those test scores. Whereas test flexible is something that is a little bit more rare, but you do see it occasionally with schools. But this is an option for students that if you're not a good test taker, but you don't want to not submit anything and you'd like to have something as part of your application, a test flexible school is going to allow you to choose what test to submit with your application. It's really important to look into the requirements of these schools because you may be able to submit an ACT, SAT, they may accept AP scores or IB if you're an IB program. So it's really important to look at the requirements for all of these schools, know their policies. Is a school that you're interested in test optional? Is it test blind? Is it test flexible? Are they requiring exams? And know that these policies are probably going to change year to year as the pandemic changes. So just to give you an example of school policies, because we're based in California, I wanted to kind of focus on the CSUs and the UCs. The CSUs are currently test blind for the 2022-23 academic year. And I have a little asterisk next to them because they are currently actually reviewing this right now. So they actually just came out with some communications earlier this week that they're going to be reviewing these, and they're going to come out with more information probably later this year. So it sounds like they're going to make a decision on what to do as soon as next month. So by the time you may be watching this presentation, those requirements may have changed. Right now, though, they are, accepting test scores if students would like to submit them, and they can use those for placement in math or English courses. So if you are a good test taker, it is, an advantage to submit those scores to the school. Whereas the UCs, on the other hand, are test blind, and they will be test blind moving forward. So there was some talk last year about the UCs developing their own exam once they dropped the SAT, but that didn't come to fruition. So the UCs are just completely test blind moving forward. So there's some reason to think that the CSUs will also incorporate a test blind policy to follow the UCs, since the structures are very similar for both school systems, but that remains to be seen. Other schools, on the other hand, other private institutions, public institutions, especially out of state, their requirements are going to vary significantly school to school. So again, it's really important to research your schools of interest and know where you're interested in applying so that you make sure that you have all those elements in your application. So knowing that now, why should you still take a standardized exam this year or beyond this year? So there are a lot of reasons to still take a standardized exam. The first, as we kind of come out of this pandemic a little bit more, as the vaccination rates are a little bit higher, there is, a possibility that some schools may reinstate testing requirements. So many schools are still kind of test optional or test flexible for this fall. Some schools are still deciding, but it is possible that some schools may reinstate these requirements. The second note is that the number of applications are skyrocketing. So because so many of these schools did go test optional, it opened up a giant pool of applicants. So schools are getting more applications, therefore becoming more selective just because of the number of applications. So if you're a good test taker, if you can get a decent score on one of these exams, those test scores can really help you stand out among a large field of applicants. So we really would encourage you to still submit those test scores. It's just nice to have that extra piece to your application to back up everything else that they're already seeing. They're already seeing your grades, your rigorous coursework, and this is just another piece that kind of underscores that. The third point is that with everyone learning virtually and transitioning to this learning from home or working from home environment, high schools are using kind of varying policies for calculating GPAs. So what, each school kind of calculates it slightly differently. And that's really hard for a college or a university to kind of understand that, a 3.5 at one school may be a really great GPA, whereas a 3.5 at another school, may not be as competitive. So having those test scores that are that unbiased data, they're going to confirm your academic readiness. So again, just kind of underscoring that you are a good student and you're showing it through your grades and your test scores. So if you, are a strong test taker, these scores are really only going to help your admission chances at test optional schools. It's never going to hurt them. So this is especially compared to students that do not submit scores. So again, we really encourage you guys to think about taking a standardized exam, look into it, and submit those scores. You can look at a school's freshman profile for what the school admitted the previous year to look at, okay, do my test scores align with what they, accepted their last freshman year, the incoming freshmen? Do my test scores align with the math scores? Do they align with the reading scores? If they do, then I definitely would encourage you to submit those test scores. Number 5 is that, some of these scores might be required for scholarships, special programs, course placement, and even one-year transfers. So sometimes they, like we were talking about with the CSUs a couple minutes ago, they will use those for math or English courses. So you may be able to get some credit towards courses. Maybe you have to take a couple less classes at college, just like you would be able to, like with an AP course, you might be able to get some credits for that. So again, it's always to your advantage to submit those scores. And then finally, number 6, high scores on even the PSAT and the ACT may be able to qualify for National Merit Awards. So you may get a scholarship or a tuition discount. So if you are one of those, super high scores, it is in your best benefit because that will help give you money for college. So if you are interested in taking one of these standardized exams, these are the upcoming test dates for the SAT and the ACT. So you have several options through the summer. There will be ones, offered later on through the year when they announce the rest of their schedule, but keep in mind the registration dates. February 12th is very soon. So I don't suggest signing up for that one now if you haven't already. Give yourself time to prepare for this exam, because as we were just discussing, it is in your best interest to try to do your best on this exam. And as some of you may have heard, just last week, I believe, the SAT came out with some information that they're actually going to be coming out with a new revamped version of the SAT. So this new exam is going to be available starting in the United States in 2024. So this is something to keep in mind, especially, if you're in middle school thinking about, or you have, children in middle school that may be taking this exam, or even, maybe a late freshman or something taking this exam. But this new exam is going to be completely digital. So it's going to be 100% online, no more paper and pencil. Students can take this on their own device or a school approved device. It's also going to be much shorter. The exam's now going to be 2 hours instead of 3 hours. And it's also going to be calculator friendly. Currently, the way the SAT is set up is that you can only use a calculator on one of the math sections, not on both of them. So they're making a lot of changes to make it a little bit more user friendly. And everything that I've read so far sounds like the students enjoy taking this exam a lot more. So just things to be prepared for if you do take the exam in 2024 or beyond. Okay, and if you do have any questions, I know that was very brief. So if you do have any questions about SAT, ACT, just testing policies in general, again, please put them in the Q&A, and then we will go ahead and answer those.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Like I said, there are lots of changes, and the changes that are coming up in testing in 2024 are huge. I believe that they are releasing it to the international schools in 2023, and then they'll roll it out into the US in 2024. At least that's what was announced. Now, who knows? Like we said, things change rapidly. So while you're typing in your questions into the Q&A, I wanted to just give you some highlights of some of our upcoming webinars and webinettes. One of the big ones that I think a lot of parents are going to be interested in is the one on cyber safety, and that's going to be held on February 24th. We have several in the way of financial aid. Episode 5, mindfulness and how to keep stress and anxiety. All of us are experiencing this at different levels, and our students have experienced quite a bit. And additionally, our college students, our incoming freshmen, as they land on the college campus, they're having some adjustment issues. So I think this is a really valuable and timely topic, and I would encourage you and your students to attend. We have some things coming up about unique majors and fast-growing career paths. There's also, for example, A+ colleges for B+ students. So we have an entire series that we have just launched for this semester. And we already have about 35 or 40 of them already posted on our website on various topics. So please check that out. It's concise, quick information, and we'll give you some things to begin thinking about as you're planning for your college education and for admissions. So Analia, Elizabeth, let's get into the questions. Analia, what questions do we have?
Hi, Jan. Okay, so far we received a couple of questions. One of the first ones being, do I have to submit my SAT, ACT scores to my colleges?
So no, you don't have to. It really depends on the school policy. So if there are some schools that you're interested in, depending on where you are in the process of researching schools, let's say you know that you're interested in a UC, for example, they're test blind, so you would not have to submit those scores. The UCs are very good about being very open and putting a lot of that information on their websites. So even just kind of Googling the school name and test policy, a lot of schools are being really upfront and making it very easy to find that information now with COVID. So I'd encourage you, as you think of schools like, hey, I think I might want to go to Chapman, for example, or I might want to go to an out-of-state school. Research the school and their testing policies, because if they are test required, yes, you will have to submit those scores. If they're test optional, you don't have to. But if you are a good test taker and your score is comparable with that freshman profile, then we would encourage you to submit it because it would be in your best interest.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elizabeth. We have another question here. Can I retake the SAT and ACT?
Elizabeth,
Yes.
you want to answer that?
Yes. So you can retake either exam. Typically, I tell students that I would encourage you, if you do want to take it multiple times, to possibly try to super score or have your best score available to send to a school. I would encourage you not to take it more than 3 times. We find that students tend to not really do much better after they've taken it a 3rd time. And there are some schools out there that want to see every time you take the exam. So you don't necessarily want to be submitting too many scores. So usually 2 to 3 times is, about average and is where you're going to have your best bet of getting your best score.
Awesome. Great. Next question. How do I know which test my student should take?
That's a good question.
So,
Address it,
yeah,
or-
Jan,
I think we will, we're both like have so much we want to say about this particular topic because the tests are different. I'll start off, Elizabeth. The tests are different and they have different sections to them. The math section is going to change in the SAT coming up in 2024, but right now, part of it is with calculator, some of it is without a calculator. Our recommendation is to make a determination first as to which test you want to take, and then prepare for it, and then take the test. Don't go and take an official exam just to see which one is better for you. There's a possibility that a college might require that you send all of your test scores. And if that's the case, then you have to send those scores for the test that you were just using on a trial basis, rather than doing a diagnostic test and really getting some good data to be able to make that determination. So take a full-length SAT out of a practice book, take a full-length ACT out of a practice book, see how you do. I mean, we also have an opportunity for students to take what's called a combined test, which is half SAT, half ACT. And then you get a score for each one. You can see whether you scored higher on the SAT section or the ACT section. And then you can make a really good decision because you've had experience with both types of tests. And then you can decide when you have time to prep and figure out your testing dates and timeline, and you're making a better decision because you're making it on fact and you're making it on your actual experience on those practice tests. Elizabeth, do you want to say anything about the differences between the ACT and the SAT?
Yeah, I think the combination exam is really helpful to find out your strengths, what you do better in, what you might test better in. Some students that enjoy reading or English a little bit more tend to enjoy the ACT a little bit more. They tend to find it a little bit easier. Also, if you're a math, heavy student, if you really enjoy math, then you may gravitate more towards the SAT. With that caveat, again, if this is just the exams now, how they are in 2022 versus I'm not sure, all the changes that they'll incorporate, it's possible that the SAT will change and become, much more aligned with the ACT in a couple years or, vice versa. But right now, that's kind of what we tend to see in general. But there are students that, really kind of could take either exam. And then it's really just about what format do you like. The SAT has options on the math portion, for example, for like write-in grade answers. It's like a free response. Some students don't like that. So maybe an ACT is a better choice for you. So it's really just about, kind of getting your hands in it and figuring out what you like.
Perfect. Great. All right, ladies, I think we have just about 2 more questions if we have time.
Okay.
Question being, if I don't submit test scores, how will they evaluate my application?
That's a really good question. So there still are other ways that they're going to evaluate your application. The test scores are just one component of that. So let's say that maybe, your test scores just aren't where you would want them to be and you don't submit them. That's okay. Don't stress out about that. There's still many other components to your application. The biggest one is going to be your transcript from high school. So the classes that you took, the rigor of the course load, and how you did in those classes. So if you have the opportunity to take, a few APs courses or maybe an IB course, if your school offers that, we would strongly encourage you to do that. They're going to be looking at rigor of course load, the grades that you got. They're also going to be looking at personal statements, supplemental essays to get to, know a little bit more about you. And then also extracurriculars, what are you participating in? Every single component of your application, they'll still be looking at. Test scores are just one portion of that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So we have a question that came in that says, how are the Cal States deciding since they don't take personal essays or test scores? How are they evaluating their applicants, basically?
A really good question. It's a very good question because they get so many applications. And there are a few things that are on there as far as how you spend your time outside of the classroom. They don't have essays, so they won't be using an essay, at least they're not this year. Now, they could decide to change that. And as I said, this thing is very fluid. Things are changing all the time. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Cal State stay test blind, that they add another component to their application. But right now, as it stands, it's based on your grades from 10th and 11th grade. And so therefore, the rigor of the courses that a student takes is becoming more and more important. And then it looks at have you spent a certain percentage of your time towards your intended major? And I think that's about it. Am I right, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
That sound about right? Yeah. So it's a really good question. We've asked that question ourselves among our counseling team. But that's what they're using.
Great.
It's a great question.
And looks like right now, the last question that we have is, do colleges use test scores for anything else other than admission? So if they do submit their test scores, are they used for anything else other than the admissions process? Elizabeth, I think you touched on it briefly, but maybe.
Yeah, so some schools will use your test scores for course placement. So like those CSUs, again, they're currently using them to place students in math courses or English courses. If you're doing really well, you might be able to skip some of those entry-level courses, kind of similar to an AP if you pass an AP exam. Some schools will also use, good test scores for merit scholarships or merit aid. So there are many, reasons outside of just, having a test score to still submit the test score. I think the biggest ones would be course placement and merit aid.
Okay.
Perfect.
So it's a hot topic. I'm sure that we'll be doing another update towards the end of this semester. So in May or June, honestly, because things are changing so rapidly. And those of you that have your younger students, all this could completely flip by the time your student is ready to actually apply to college. I will say that with testing, from everything that I've learned from meetings I've been sitting in with deans of admission, et cetera, that if you are a good test taker, take the test. As one dean said, once you've seen a good test score, you cannot unsee it. So, it just resides there in their minds as they're reviewing the application. So there's actually been an 8% increase this year in students submitting test scores with their applications. Over 50% are submitting scores. So that might give you a sense of what's happening in the application process. Is people are still continuing to prep and they're still continuing to test. So I say take the test, see how you do, see how your test scores look in comparison to the schools that you're planning to apply to. And the schools where it shows to be a competitive score, send it. And the schools where you think it is not going to be that work to your benefit, don't send it to those. You've got complete control as to who sees those scores. So take advantage of it. It's one thing that we can count on right now that we can control, because so much has felt out of control over the last several years. But that's one thing that we're pretty set on, that you have the control so far whether or not you're going to submit scores. Except for those few colleges that do require them, such as the Florida state schools and Georgia. They're actually dictated by the legislature whether or not they require test scores, and both states do require test scores there. So we will have another session. We will send you notification about it. Check our website. We post our recordings there, and as well as the announcements of our upcoming webinars and webinars. If you have any questions or haven't been able to find the information, just give us a call at our office or shoot us an email, which is there at the bottom of the screen. So we love having the time with you. Excuse me. And we thank you for joining us. So have a good evening, everybody. Good night.